Fuel for 3 regions is under fire. Fires, detonations, rear collapse.
Why are they taking so long to get here?
One arsenal down, air defense hitting their own, fuel lost. Energy collapse, aviation collapse. The war is coming into Russia.
It felt like the explosion happened right here. Debris.
It was a night of panic for Moscow and Russia. Moscow is under drone attacks. Airports are practically paralyzed. More than 500 flights have been delayed. Thousands of Muscovites are stranded in the affected regions. Freezing temperatures, a state of emergency, power and heat outages. Highways are blocked by snow and trucks. Deliveries are being disrupted. In the Krasnodar region and Adygea, up to 400,000 Russians are without power and heat. All of this is compounded by strikes on military industry and the energy sector. We'll discuss what's happening in Russia right now with well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome. And congratulations on your recent birthday.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health. Thank you very much.
Friends, leave your comments below. A few kind words for Roman Grigorievich. His birthday was just recently on January 4th and today is the 5th. So, in the comments, write a few kind words, show your support, and congratulate Roman Grigorievich. Let's start with something pleasant. Aviation collapse in Moscow. Sobyanin was knocking down drones with his own hands again. Panic at Domodedovo, Zhukovsky, Sheremetyevo, and Vnukovo. Restrictions were imposed, 500 flights were delayed. But the situation is also serious because, in addition, strikes were carried out on key military targets in the Moscow region. What do you think?
Well, at the very least, it's not that I share a birthday with Budanov. It's that Budanov shares a birthday with me. Since I'm a bit older, he's 40 and I'm 62. Thank you for the congratulations. Operations on Russian territory, of course, are ongoing. It continues, especially in Moscow. For several years, we've been saying that the route to Moscow is for extremely skittish idiots. In the end, these unafraid idiots have become skittish idiots. And those 500 delayed flights you mentioned, well, their flights were delayed and they were practically escorted to detention centers. But in reality, of course, this is a very serious blow to the Russian economy. This is the main objective right now. At this stage, it's practically impossible to break through Moscow's air defense on the wing. Either you have to strike, say, at a single point along one azimuth in a wave, at least with several hundred drones, then a few will get through and hit something, maybe break some windows in high rises. But in reality, of course, Moscow needs to be hit with ballistic missiles. As soon as ballistic missiles appear, not these little ballistic video teasers or announcements, but actual ballistic missiles, that's when we'll really be able to hit Moscow. Where can you stir things up around Moscow? Again, why? To cripple the Russian economy. The thing is, what are 500 flights? Yes, that's several tens of millions of rubles that won't make it into the Russian treasury. That's one. And second, it's billions of curses on Putin's head. They're not cursing Ukrainians. They're cursing Putin, who started all this. Well, at least that's what I hope. They're cursing Putin, who started this war against Ukraine. Ukraine is defending itself, and in doing so is naturally putting pressure on the Russian economy, including through the flights of our drones. Mainly it's for this purpose, for organizing the cover plan so that Russian planes simply don't fly. Our civil aviation is grounded. Well, first of all, there's the war. That's one issue. And the second issue is safety and the attitude, for example, towards our citizens, I mean civilians, because we are concerned about our safety. It's the Russians, the Russian Putin authorities who aren't concerned. They couldn't care less in the end whether something gets into the engine or not, whether it's a drone or not. But nevertheless, of course, we'll keep applying pressure, but again, purely in terms of the economy. And now you can see, for example, the frequency of our drones movements. Literally every day a wave of drones heads toward Moscow specifically for this purpose. Even if it's not a large number, just a few dozen, it's still for this particular task. The drones are cheap, well, relatively cheap, of course. They cost a few $1,000s, but when tens of millions of dollars are being cut from the Russian economy every day, that's a big deal. Roman Nikolaevich.
Well, in general, starting from January 1st, 2026, the situation in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the Leningrad and Moscow regions is very serious. First of all, there are blackouts there, yes, because we're hitting the thermal power plants and the Moscow region is surrounded. and there was even a blackout in the Leningrad region near St. Petersburg. Then these situations with aviation collapse are happening. Right now, everyone is writing that at the terminals there is a crush, huge lines, people are spending the night in airports, engines are failing in civil aviation, and there are massive flight delays. In general, the air traffic of the capital of St. Petersburg is basically operating in emergency mode. This was officially stated, for example, by Sobyanin. For a metropolis that relies on aviation, how much of a direct blow to manageability is this? I would like you, as someone who can professionally assess aviation, to tell us how vulnerable is Moscow right now, specifically through its aviation infrastructure, to these strikes, as you say, by cheap drones?
When scheduled flights are taking place, for example, with planes taking off and landing every few dozen seconds, a stoppage of air traffic for several hours affects almost the entire flight network. In other words, this problem spreads like ripples after an object falls into water. In the same way, the problem spreads across the entire Russian Federation and neighboring countries. Wherever they are headed, or from there, or wherever, for example, these planes were trying to fly to, because every plane has a specific schedule, a sequence of takeoffs and movements. So the entire schedule gets disrupted. And for Russians, this is a big problem. Moreover, right now, they can't replace the planes. There is a certain reserve of planes that are allocated for replacement, for example. But Russians are facing a major problem now due to sanctions on the aviation industry. And naturally, it's not possible to replace them quickly. That's why this is a serious problem for almost everyone. Russian civil aviation. But the main goal is to try to shake up the Russian economy. It definitely won't be the same as before. Maybe it won't die this year, but its health certainly won't be the same. Nabulina, Putin, and all the other Russian riffraff who are trying to manage the process and continue military actions on the territory of Ukraine understand this perfectly well. Until we restore our territorial integrity, until we squeeze $40 trillion in reparations out of the Russians, we need to be clear about this. 40 million Ukrainians, at least $1 million each for PTSD. That's what you call a windfall. That's $40 trillion. Russia, Belarus, North Korea, Iran, China. Get ready, as they say. We'll get to Venezuela too, because it turns out that in Venezuela, for the Russians, there are some military facilities, or rather military production was set up there. So we will definitely raise this issue. But right now, of course, there is pressure being applied. There is pressure on Russian aviation, on the Russian economy through aviation. Plus, at the same time, strikes are being carried out on Russian energy facilities, because in principle, destroying, say, thermal power plants, power lines, or those same substations near airfields, well, that's a sacred task, as they say, two birds with one stone. So, for example, a single drone that strikes a thermal power plant which supplies, and airfields respond to this drone by landing Russian planes in a carpet mode. So this is roughly how things will go in the near future, and until our victory, they will keep harassing our long-range strike assets. They will keep harassing the Russian economy.
Roman Egorovich, while the capital of Mordor is dealing with an aviation collapse in the Lipetsk region, the defense plant Energia comes under attack. This is a key enterprise that produces batteries, power sources for aerial bombs with planning modules, and for Iskander missile systems. The plant has long been under US and EU sanctions, but it continued to support Russia's war against Ukraine. And after the attack, which I believe is not the first, there was a fire, production was halted, at least temporarily. How important are such strikes on Energia for the entire production chain of missiles and aerial bombs? Roman Grigorievich.
This is the Energia plant in Yelets. Yelets is in the direction from Voronezh to Moscow, generally heading away from us, several hundred kilometers, but we can reach it. We currently have a sufficient number of strike assets at that range to disrupt the technological cycle, including at this military facility, which indeed mainly produces batteries of various types, aviation, ground, and even submarine batteries. That is, there they are batteries, and they produce torpedoes and so on. That is a whole range of military products. That is, for us, this is a purely military object. Already Joy 34. It was attacked, and now they are on a larger scale, but before this, they were just attacks. It's called operating in the mode of a kind of Ukrainian combat mosquito. But now dozens of drones are coming in, which are being stopped at a low cycle. But in reality, of course, let's wait until missiles start coming in. After all, a drone carries 50, kilograms in its warhead. But a missile brings half a ton, and then it won't seem like much.
An energy collapse, a state of emergency amid strikes and freezing temperatures. Regions of Russia are entering a state of emergency. Power outages, heating outages, and water shutoffs are being reported in several regions at once. In Krasnodar Krai, it's a complete collapse, a state of emergency. The utility infrastructure can't handle the load, especially in winter conditions. People are left in cold homes without electricity, without heat. Under drone attacks, the authorities talk about temporary difficulties, but the scale of the problem is growing. Roman Grigorievich, we fully understand that Putin's goal is to carry out terrorist attacks during the winter, but now Russia, we are delivering mirror responses, mirror strikes, meaning we are hitting energy facilities, and at the same time there are severe frost and cold. And now a state of emergency has been declared in more than 6 regions of Russia, including areas near Moscow. How do you assess these consequences? For Mordor?
Well, Frost Ivanovich will certainly help us. Why? Because we are still mostly south of Russia in terms of latitude. It's warmer here. At the very least, when we have frosts, it's just a few degrees below zero, not more. So to get back to those conditions, to get back to the 40-degree frosts that we had back in my youth in the last millennium, you'd really have to try hard for that. It's practically impossible in a warming climate. That's why, in this sense, it's much easier for us to get through bad weather, including the strikes from the Russians. But the Russians have a big problem because they remain in that severe climate zone. Cold weather and strikes on Russian thermal power facilities, and for us this is very important. It's precisely the energy sector that needs to be taken down, because Russia's economy is tied to its energy sector. Only by destroying the economy can the Russian Federation be dismantled from within, through a process of self-dissolution. Therefore, attacks on energy facilities, naturally on heating facilities, because they are one whole in the end, and Maros Ivanovich will help, in the end will lead to the fact that some, including Russians, will have to create so-called free heating points. I'll even tell you how it's done. Find pipes of gas pipelines, oil pipelines. You take them, set them on fire, and warm yourself there for a while, as long as the remaining gas and oil keep burning, smoldering. This is the most optimal option. Ask those who care, they know how to do it.
And then there are food ration cards, an internal breakdown. Against the backdrop of power outages, freezing temperatures, strikes on the energy sector, and transport chaos, the topic of food ration cards is surfacing in the information space. This indicates that as of today, due to the wartime economy, the pressure on the civilian sector is increasing, social tension is rising, and the authorities are making the decision to introduce food ration cards in the regions, including the Moscow region, Roman Grigorievich, and in the Leningrad region. How do you assess this?
North Korea, what else can they do? Russia is following the path of North Korea, that is external isolation. Internal contradictions, serious blows to the economy. They will eventually move to a ration card system of various levels, including for food products. We also need to pay attention to Russian distilleries. This is specifically to create serious problems internally. By the way, alcohol also brings a fairly large amount of money into the Russian economy. So strikes on distilleries will have a tandem and effect for us at the very least, a blow to the economy, a blow to the well-being of Russians. I don't drink myself, never have. I'm 62 years old as of yesterday, and I don't recommend it to others either. I've actually lived a pretty good part of my life in a clear and with a clear mind. So strikes on distilleries in the end might sober up the Russian hinterland, and they might open their eyes to see what Putin has done to them and his entire Putin clique. Maybe strikes like these will knock some sense into Russians, or at the very least clear out what's left of it. At the very least. And in the end, this will lead to, or rather accelerate, the collapse of the Russian Federation. The prison of nations must be dismantled. It can only be dismantled from within. And here's one of the options. This is just for our targeting purposes. Besides energy, thermal power, Russian oil, gas extraction, and metallurgy, we should also pay attention to the alcohol industry. On the one hand, they'll warm themselves up. Russians might even heat themselves up a bit more, but on the other hand, they might switch to a sober lifestyle.
Well, Roman Yurievich, it's written that Caracas will be taken in 3 hours, and there's the Trump and Marco Rubio special operation, the midnight hammer that everyone's talking about, right? That's the regime change in Venezuela, the extradition of Maduro and his wife to New York so they can be put on trial, as I understand it. This is already happening this Monday. In America, Maduro currently faces 4 life sentences for narco-terrorism and arms trafficking. But everyone is talking specifically about this special operation. Russian war correspondents are already in a panic. They believe that something similar could happen to the Putin regime as well. Obviously, this is most likely an unrealistic scenario because Russia is a nuclear state. That's a very important factor that influences all of this. Roman Igorovich, but still, is it possible to carry out similar special operations in the Kremlin? Well, I mean, the tradition, Putin being taken from his residence in 3 hours, so to speak.
We criticized Donald Trump when he spoke quite negatively about our drones entering Vladimir Putin's official residence. You certainly remember that, don't you? So it seemed like it happened. But as it turned out, there weren't any drones at all. So was there even a boy? Turns out there wasn't. So Trump initially reacted negatively, at least at first. So why did we criticize him? We thought that he was saying that's not the way to do it. But the reason he said it was an insufficient action. A few days later, he flew helicopters into Maduro's residence, the presidential one, and kidnapped the president. He showed how it should be done, how we should have entered Valdai properly. That's why Trump should also be treated with a certain amount of sarcasm at the very least, but also recognize some positive aspects. He demonstrated it, there you go. That's exactly how it should have been done with Putin, in just that way. Well, obviously, that's sarcasm on our part, but in reality, of course, the operation to steal, take Maduro, for example, was clearly coordinated with the local security forces. This was a backroom deal, pure and simple. Everyone understands that, especially the military. Look, let me explain it in simple terms. The Venezuelan army has several thousand Igla manpads. This is a Russian Soviet-made man-portable air defense system that frankly can take someone out with a single shot. Not just one or two, but dozens of American helicopters. And if not a single missile was fired at the helicopters, not a single helicopter was shot down, then this was a backroom deal, pure and simple. So you need to understand that clearly. What kind of deal it was and who exactly made the arrangements is another question entirely. There was simply no resistance at all, especially considering the amount of aviation the Venezuelan army has, several dozen Russian Su-30 aircraft, and those are equipped with anti-ship missiles. They could have sunk at least a third of the American fleet there. That's why, without coordination with Maduro's inner circle, no one would have carried out this operation. And the Americans understand this perfectly well. If they had gotten involved in military actions in Venezuela, they wouldn't have been able to get out of there, and they wouldn't have even managed to escape the way they did from Afghanistan. After all, it's a different continent. But this is right next door, North and South America, right next door. And frankly, it would have been a real problem. That's why everything was agreed upon first, and only then was such an operation carried out to eliminate Maduro along with his wife. For certain further actions, again, what kind of actions are we talking about? Condemnation. But condemnation of whom? Let the president come here. He's illegitimate. There's no question about that. Everyone understands it perfectly well. His legitimacy is highly questionable. Naturally, he was pulled out for trial, only for trial, not because of legitimacy, but for trial over so-called drug trafficking. There, every other president is a druggie. I mean, they're involved in drug trafficking. For example, just a month ago, Trump pardoned the president of Honduras. In the year 2022, he was ultimately convicted and subsequently sentenced to a substantial 45 years in prison. And then when Donald Trump eventually came to power, what exactly did he proclaim right away? Why did you lock up such a great guy? He had some great coke back in the day. He supplied 400 tons. Let's let him out. He releases the president of Honduras right before arresting Maduro. I think the same will happen with Maduro. The same thing. It's basically the same story. Most likely the same will happen to him. All these moves are agreed upon too. So you shouldn't pay attention to this operation since it's just a basic routine one. Operations like this won't be carried out anymore. Well, maybe this one, maybe one more again as part of some agreement. All the other countries, let's say, that the United States is currently targeting, well, not the United States as a whole, but specifically Trump, they will put up serious resistance because Maduro was the only one like that. Unstable, but going forward, there will be problems, even now at this stage. For us, in principle, actions of this kind are like, you cut through, you sorted it out, well done. In this sense, he didn't let it escalate into a war, so to speak. Right now, that's a plus. Why else would they get slapped in the face over there? But if the Americans get involved in some kind of little war, it will mean less weaponry coming to us from abroad. This is a big problem for us, of course. If the Americans get involved somewhere in a serious war, it will create very serious military problems for us, at least at the moment, because right now Europe can't fully cut off the supply of weapons from America.
No, you said indirectly a special op is impossible in Russia, right?
At this stage, definitely not. And if it were needed, let's say, by Trump himself, then there would have been a different operation in Anchorage. In that case, the American army wouldn't be bending over backwards, clearing the way for Putin to meet the dictator. They would have already dealt with him directly. It's hardly possible, even conceptually. And again, take Trump's attitude, for example. You brought up this topic quite accurately. Putin, who has 500,000 Ukrainian deaths on his hands, is welcomed by him on American soil and given the red carpet treatment. And essentially the same goes for Maduro, who was sharing happiness with the American people by supplying hundreds of tons of cocaine there. But in the end, he was apprehended and now he's going to be put on trial. In fact, he could be facing 4 life sentences there. Well, that's not just double standards. By 22 standards at the very least.
Roman Nikolaevich, and of course, to wrap up, against the backdrop of strikes on Moscow, the aviation collapse, and the energy crisis, a key piece of news emerges. From Kyiv, the head of the security service of Ukraine, Vasyl Malyuk, officially announces that he is stepping down as head of the SBU. Well, of course, that's the official version. We all know perfectly well that Zelensky fired him. At the same time, Malyuk emphasizes that he is not leaving the system, but is staying on at the SBU to carry out asymmetric special operations of a global level that will inflict maximum damage on Russia's enemy. This is an important formulation. Do you think this is not a demotion or a resignation, but rather a reformatting of his role? And accordingly, of course, as of today, we have a new head of the SBU. Everyone is discussing his persona. And everyone is talking about the fact that for now, he is only serving as the acting head of the SBU. Roman Yegorovich, Yevhen Komara, he was the head of the SBU Special Operations Center, and today Volodymyr Zavetsky publicly announced that he will be acting as the head of the SBU. How do you assess these personnel changes?
When you try to push someone who is in their place somewhere, it goes negatively, definitely negatively. Why? Because Malyuk is probably the only head of the service who, after more than 30 years, has finally made the service Ukrainian. Before this, we had the SBU. What came out of the side of the bow? Russian, Israeli, American, British, whatever you like, but anything but Ukrainian. So Malyuk turned it into a Ukrainian special service. The only issue is that he didn't have time to completely reformat it. Why? Because for the service to fully carry out combat tasks, it needs to clean up not only itself. They've cleaned themselves up there quite well. The counter Malyuk people did their job, but now they need to clean up the parallel structures. That's very important. The Ministry of Internal Affairs, the prosecutor's office, the courts, and so on. That's what it's called on the list. In other words, law enforcement. Law enforcement hasn't yet fully reached all the special services to make them 100% purely Ukrainian. We understand, after all, the involvement of Americans, Britons, Israelis, Russians. Some of our special services and the main branches of government are still heavily influenced by them. So Malyuk was dealing with this. Maybe that's actually one of the reasons he was removed, precisely because of this. He actually started to approach these issues quite correctly and competently. Nevertheless, the matter is settled. Well, technically it's not settled yet because the Verkhovna Rada still has to vote and so on, but conceptually it's resolved. And as I understand it, Malyuk agreed to this kind of arrangement or movement. Well, from the perspective of a leader of this kind leaving their post right now, at this moment, the service will of course be a bit shaken. Obviously, if the service has been properly organized, and Malyuk did organize it, this is a very serious management system, and no one will be able to completely dismantle it. But Akmar definitely won't do that, because he's also a competent general who was also in the right place. The Alpha Special Operations Center, the security service, has shown quite good results lately. We were almost celebrating every day because of the work done in this area. Overall, it's not entirely positive. This is how it's perceived by the public, including the military. Everyone understands perfectly well that these are some other influences. That is most likely to this day someone like Yermak Korbevich is involved in these processes. But I think that in the near future it will become more clear to those who are informed about this. People will share the details in the information flow. Later, we will analyze these reasons, the main reasons for such actions.
Friends, please like this video. Once again, congratulate Roman and Svetlana on their birthdays and share your thoughts about the resignation. At this moment, write a few words in support of Ukraine's armed forces and the head of the SBU, Malyuk, in the comments. Roman Igoric, thank you, and as usual, see you this Wednesday.